Brooklyn Independent Television.
Hey, it's a big borough.
Will Brooklyn really go for it?
Why don't we just agree to disagree?
Yeah, that's really gonna fly in
Well,
Brooklyn.
that's a good question.
No. Listen.
That's exactly the point I wanted to make.
Well, it's that time of the year again. There's state of the state, state of the city, state of the borough. So we wanted to check in on the state of all of it. And I'm joined today by veteran New York journalist and now an instructor at the Cuny School of Journalism, Tom Robbins. Thank you for being here today.
Good to be here, Brian.
So let's start right at the top. The State of the State address. Governor Cuomo, first state of the state, and he's pulling out his PowerPoint presentations again. Yeah. That was a big hit last time. So how do you think the State of the State went over?
You know, I think Andrew Cuomo, it was almost a victory roll. You know, he had a remarkable first year. Right. And he managed to get things done, and I think brought a sense back to the state and to the electorate that after the craziness of the Spitzer and the Patterson years, that you can actually get down to serious business, then you can accomplish things. And I think that no matter what side of the political fence you're on, you have to acknowledge that Andrew Cuomo did deliver on so many things. And his last move right before his State of the State, by coming up with a budget agreement that would reinstate a good chunk of what had been castigated as the millionaire's tax, which he had said he would never do, but reaching an agreement not only with the state legislature, which went ahead with it for other reasons, but also with his supporters on the business side of the state, who had said it was going to drive people out. That really was the kind of compromise and nonpartisan leadership that people, I think, are looking for. So in a way, I'm not sure it really mattered what he said in his State of the State this time around. He'd already
delivered.
He had delivered really important things to the state. What he's talking about, I mean, his big projects were a new convention center, probably out at Aqueduct Raceway in Queens, and possibly casino gambling, which he would support. And I think a lot of people, myself included, needed to be convinced that either one of those are good ideas. Right. But I'm willing to have the discussion, and I'm willing to have it batted around. And he said some other things which I thought were pretty interesting.
One thing that I thought was interesting overall was the sort of tenor of the speech and the way that people seem to be getting along in Albany now. Yeah. And do you think those divisive days are over, that he has sort of gotten the mandate from the people and is mending those fences and making good with Sheldon Silver and the rest of the guys up there?
No, there's a little bit of a flare-up the last couple of days with Shelley Silver already, and he'll have more confrontation down the road with Senate Republicans. You know, some of the big things are still hanging out there. We don't know what's going to happen with redistricting. Right. One of the things the governor campaigned on was to have independent, nonpartisan redistricting, and everybody agrees with that in theory, and no one wants to do it in practice. Right. So that's going to be another big thing on his agenda, and we'll see whether or not he can deliver on it. If he does decide that he really needs that and wants it, then he's going to look at some pretty tough clashes with both those houses.
Former Mayor Ed Koch with his New York Uprising campaign, and a lot of those guys signed the promise that they would be for independent redistricting, but we haven't seen a lot of action on that. Time to put up or shut up.
It's so crucial. I mean, it's funny. It's like sitting on the outside, we sort of wonder, like, well, what are all these debates about? Why are they fighting about it? But they're fighting about, as I like to say in my Mel Brooks imitation, our phony baloney jobs. I mean, they have jobs. They're politicians. They want to protect them, and that means having districts which can elect someone from their party. And if they're the incumbent of their party, they can get elected. And we see it in both houses. In the Assembly, they've carved up Bay Ridge into 4 different districts, basically to make it impossible, even though there's many conservatives who live in that district.
For a Republican to get consensus.
For a Republican to win, exactly. Yeah. And on the other hand, in the Senate districts down there in southern Brooklyn, we see it divvied up so that Karl Krueger, who was as right-wing as a Democrat as you could have, had an impregnable seat. Marty Golden has an impregnable seat, a Republican. And that's the divvying up of the assets, and no one wants to touch that. That's really the third rail of politics, and that's why this is going to be a tougher one if the governor decides to go after it.
Those guys, we're talking about the state, this gang of 4 that held up the process and virtually put a stop to all state government actions. Montserrat was there. Krueger was one of the guys. and we had Montserrat Krueger, Pedro Espada,
and Ruben Diaz.
Senior. Of the four,
Right.
Senior is the only one who still has a viable job.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, right. They all raised their heads and they all got cut off one by one. You know, look, I mean, we're a Brooklyn show, and so, you know, maybe we can dispense with talking about the Bronx and Queens candidates. But Karl Krueger really is an interesting person in a lot of ways because of the fact that he was, in a way, old school Brooklyn politics. He came out of a clubhouse down there in South Brooklyn, the Thomas Jefferson Club, which was and probably is the last of the really strong Democratic political clubhouses in the borough. And he never had a strong challenge. It was just his district. Right. And he managed to make himself into an incredible force in the Senate because of the fact, for one thing, he had the second biggest bankroll of any incumbent politician aside from the governor in Albany. He had raised, I think his last was like $3 or $4 million that he was sitting on. And how he raised that money, I wrote a few stories about it because of the fact that it was such a pay-to-play situation. He would literally go up and down his district, and you could see the connections between the people who were giving him money and the things that he was helping them with.
Right. All the bright, shiny outsides are Krueger supporters and people who were on his side.
Yeah. And now he fell so suddenly. I mean, it's really interesting, I think, the fact that, you say Krueger's gone now. But Karl Krueger was someone, he was considered one of the most important figures in Brooklyn for a long time. You'd see him next to Borough President Marty Markowitz at events. Nobody was embarrassed to be seen with Karl Krueger.
Yeah, he was everywhere.
And then all of a sudden we turned out he's a crook. And he admits he was a crook. And I think that says something about both, people like you and me, we like to, well, what's going on with these politicians? How come they raise money in the way they are? And unless the prosecutors come in and tell us there's something really wrong, it continues.
Yeah, it's just a mystery until it's revealed. And the funny thing is that he sort of drew it out. He didn't do a mea culpa as soon as the news hit, because we were talking about this last summer even.
That's right. Yeah, I think
and he was still maintaining, he was not making any confessions, and he certainly wasn't saying, oh, I'm guilty, but he rolled over pretty quickly when it really came down to it.
Yeah. And he had the best possible legal representation. His friend Ben Brafman, who was probably one of the best criminal defense attorneys that you'd want to have in the city. He had ample money to pay for a defense. He had no other alternative. Plead guilty.
Yeah, it was the path of least resistance, and I guess the classiest way out if you are going to be a corrupt guy.
It'd be interesting to see whether or not he has anything to say to us now. I mean, whether or not he'll just sort of disappear,
sunset out,
or whether or not he'll feel called upon to say, okay, I'd like to explain myself to my constituents.
One thing that has emerged from that is a bill that he was part of, where if a politician or an elected official, they like to be called, is found to have to leave their seat because of the illegal activities, that they should lose their pension.
Right.
But that's something that he voted for, but conveniently happens to be on the other side of, because he's sort of grandfathered in, and he's going to draw $60,000 a year, I believe was the figure. Yeah. So $60,000 a year is not such a bad consolation prize.
It's pretty good. A lot of Brooklynites would love to have that.
Definitely.
For the number of years he served.
Yeah, put me down. So to the present and to the future. Looking ahead for his seat, Vito Lopez, who has been sort of laying low, gets to pick a candidate to run for that special election March 20th.
Yeah, and no surprise that the Brooklyn Democratic County leader, Lopez, would decide to go right back to the Thomas Jefferson Club, which has been a tremendous supporter of him. Right. Helped get him the job in the first place, and say, who do you want? And the answer is Lou Fiddler. And certainly in terms of elected officials who have been out there and representing their district, Lou Fiddler gets big points for that.
So he's a known quantity.
Yeah. It's interesting to see whether anybody else steps forward to try to challenge him. I guess it doesn't look like he's going to get a serious primary.
Yeah.
But he does have a Republican opponent, businessman David Storabin.
David Storabin, who's actually been a guest here on on Intersect before. Maybe we'll have him on Brooklyn Review as the race shapes up. But small businessman, Russian immigrant, came to the country with his mom when he was a young teen, I believe, 12, 13 years old. So he's been here for a long time and self-made guy.
Maybe he's the one to do it. I don't know, but I've always felt that the Russian population in that part of Brooklyn is a sleeping giant waiting to awake, and it surprises me that Democrats in groups like the Thomas Jefferson Club have not gone out there more aggressively to try to recruit them and say, I mean, there's this connection that allegedly Russians make between the party of Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan was the man who tore down the Berlin Wall, and that may well be true, but there's an opening there clearly for Democrats to try to convince Russians, if they're going to become citizens and they're going to vote, that this is another viable party for them. They don't seem to have done it very aggressively. Their sort of response has been like, we'll just sort of like deal with you as you appear. But one of these days, they're going to be there, and maybe Starobin will get some of that wind in his sails as he does this candidacy. We'll see.
We had occasion to be at the Shore YMCA right before the last general election and did a story on voter machines there. And we were there, and there was a large senior population, many of them Russian-speaking, and they were bemoaning the fact that Russian wasn't yet an official language in the rolls for the electronic voting machines. And I would hope that that problem or that missed opportunity has since been rectified.
A good campaign platform you just described.
Well, I'll be looking for your vote out there on the Shore Y. But just the lack of diversity in some of these citywide period with John Liu, who is become recently embattled is the word you read next to his name a lot, is the only Asian American elected. So it would be interesting to see another immigrant population sort of step to the fore with that opportunity. But one more thing, speaking of immigrant populations and electeds, we have Matthew Eugene, who's currently the only citywide, or not citywide, but he's an elected city council member who happens to be from Haiti. I know that there's a woman in the district of Lou Fidler. If Lou Fidler was to go and make a bid for the Krueger seat, Mercedes Narcisse, who's been on our show as well, so we've got Brooklyn covered apparently, who's been very active in the Haitian community as well as earthquake relief, and we had her on talking about those things, is poised to run for his seat. So we may have...
See if that happened. I mean, I didn't know that before you mentioned it, but if Lou Fidler's a classic old line Brooklyn elected official gets succeeded by a new immigrant Haitian-born person, that would be true. That would be true ethnic succession. I mean, that would be an interesting thing if that happened.
Yeah, it's just a study in the demography of how Brooklyn's changing neighborhoods change and evolve.
More power to her.
Yeah, so she would make that run, and she's already put herself out there and said, I want to get my organization strong. And just saw her recently this weekend at a rally Jumaane Williams had sponsored in right next to the library at the Grand Army for police accountability. And he called on the mayor to make sure that in his State of the City speech, which is coming this evening, that it has to be more than a line item, that they demand greater police accountability this year as a New Year's resolution sort of thing. So that is something that we're seeing people becoming politically energized about the police issue. But one thing that the mayor has to include in the State of the City is something about food stamps. We've got 1.6 million New Yorkers, New York City people on food stamps right now, and the fight between the mayor and the governor is about fingerprinting them.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to come down?
Well, I'm not sure it'll be in the mayor's state of the city, but I bet you it's going to be in Christine Quinn's state of the city, because she agrees with the governor on this issue that the demand that the city imposes that food stamp applicants provide fingerprints, she says, is unnecessary and a possible dissuasion to people who are looking to apply. It's an interesting debate that had gone away for a long time. I hadn't heard it until the governor raised it again in his State of the State address, and the mayor reacted to it. To me, the bigger issue with food stamps was always the fact that the city imposes certain regulations on people, aside from fingerprinting, that make it harder to get food stamps, or harder than some other municipalities are. And I've written about that in the past, and the Bloomberg administration was very adamant that we believe that certain people who don't meet our minimum criteria shouldn't be eligible. And that debate, I always thought, well, why are we being so strict with eligibility? The fingerprinting issue, I think the case is yet to be made on both the governor's side on that one as to how many people are actually deciding not to apply because of that. I drove a cab for years here in New York. I had to get fingerprinted. I think a lot of people feel like, fingerprinting is not that, in this day and age, such a big intrusion into your private life. I may be wrong about that. It may be that, yes, right. It may be that people really are not doing it for that reason, in which case we should have that discussion. But it's interesting that it sort of popped out in the State of the State, and now it'll probably be in Quinn's State of the City, is my guess.
That's become a thing, and the mayor pointed out that the city has 230-some thousand employees who've all been fingerprinted, including myself in a former life when I did work for the city. I got my fingers all linked up, and they're floating around somewhere, presumably. But they say there's a stigma attached. But this is one of the rare times that the mayor and the speaker have come down on a different side of the issue. Fingerprinting, and this goes back to an argument that they had about the homeless shelters as well, sort of access to homeless shelters being given to people, another social services thing where the mayor floated the idea that you have to show some exhaustive list or qualifications, that if you have a cousin who lives in Poughkeepsie that you could stay with, or any other means before entering the system, that you should explore those options and prove that you don't have access to them before you're allowed to indulge, not even indulge, but to take advantage of the assistance that's out there for homeless people.
Well, one of the things that we sometimes forget about Christine Quinn is that she started as a community housing organizer. And some of these issues, like I think the fingerprinting, like homeless issues, are in her DNA.
Right to the core.
And I don't think that those are going away. She has definitely softened and moderated her views on many things that have people asking questions about what kind of Democrat she is at this point. But I think some of that stuff still goes right, as you say, right to her core.
That seems to be sort of the national reflected in the very local, some of the criticism that we've heard from the sort of Obama campaign about how he's shifted his views can now be applied to maybe Christine Quinn. She's from Chelsea, a very sort of liberal district. How do you think that's going to play as she sort of shifts her allegiances if she's actually going to make a bid for the mayoralship?
I think that what she's doing is trying to basically pick her shots on this one. I think that she's looking for opportunities to be able to show the larger business and real estate community of New York that she's not knee-jerk, that she's open to successful business and moving forward into development. She's got her work cut out for her, I think, not on so much on that score. I think that the third term, I think that her support of Mayor Bloomberg's bid for a third term is the thing that's going to be hardest for her to get over. I think that left a sour taste. It's a while ago already. By the time she runs, it'll be almost 5 years later. But I think that that's the one question. Why did you do that? You really did that for your own political ends and for your council colleagues' political ends. And in the end, the entire rationale that the mayor had put forward for his third term was that I'm a businessman and we're headed into bad times. It didn't really pan out for New York. As he proudly says, we've ridden above the economic storm, largely, compared to the rest of the country. So I think going down into it, particularly into a Democratic primary up against people like public advocate Bill de Blasio, possibly the comptroller John Liu if he decides to stay in the game, Scott Stringer if he decides to do it, the Manhattan Borough president. I think that's where she's going to be most vulnerable. It's going to be harder for her to win a Democratic primary than it is for her to win a general election.
The Democratic, in New York City, the Democratic primary is often akin to the general election in real
except we
terms.
Haven't had a Democrat as mayor now for what? It's going to be 20 years? All right, it's a long time.
So this time it's shaping up. One of the names you mentioned, de Blasio, has been, he's on the same side of the issue with Chris Quinn on the food stamps. I've seen some things that have come out of his office. He also has his worst landlords of New York City list that he's coming out, really trying to raise the profile of the public advocate's office. Like I've seen him, and maybe it's by default that we knew him in Brooklyn already, but I just think he's out there more than we've seen Betsy than we saw Betsy Gottman when she was the public advocate. I feel like he's really become more visible in an office that a lot of people still question the rationale for, if we even need a public advocate anymore. Do you think that office is going to go the way of the dodo?
No, I don't think so. I think that the opportunity for that to happen came and went.
Yeah.
I think that there was a time under both the Giuliani and Bloomberg administrations when the possibility of a charter change that would really rein in the public advocate's office was, if they could mount the campaign to win the vote, was a possibility. But I don't think people are going to raise it again. I think the issue of public advocate is an office that evolved. It was formerly city council president. I think there's a feeling that you need someone other than the comptroller. If you've seen the comptroller is going to spend most of his or her time focusing on the business of the city, you want someone else who can really be what that job is described as an ombudsman. They almost strangled the office in terms of budget. It's a tiny budget. I mean, it's astonishing to me. It still is amazing that nobody wanted to run for comptroller last time, but we had half a dozen people who wanted to be public advocate, even though the budgets are
slashed in half.
There's nothing there compared to 800 employees or something at the comptroller's office and about 25 at the public advocate's office. But that's because it is a potential bully pulpit, and Bill de Blasio is an accomplished and terrific public advocate, I think, in lots of ways, and he's going to use the office both, this worst landlord thing that he's picked up, courtesy of the Village Voice, my old employer, which as well he should, and other efforts that help. It's what Mark Green did. Mark Green was the first public advocate, and he was probably the best public advocate we had because of the fact that he understood in more ways than anybody else as to how to use the levers of government. He was the first one to do a study of police stop and frisk. Forced the city to come up with numbers on that stuff. I mean, these are some of the things that you can do in that office.
So you spoke a moment ago about the charter when I guess the last opportunity where there really was to sort of end the office of the public advocate. But one that reminded me of being at the State of the Borough, which is coming up February 1st. Borough President Markowitz is going to have his big night out at Brooklyn College this year. And State of the Borough, he always calls for the charter to give more power back to the borough presidents and to shore up that office, because he really feels like they're the voice of the boroughs, and people get lost in the shuffle if they don't have that strong advocacy coming from that level, who's able to be, as he calls, the chief nudge to the mayor's office. But one of the things that chief advocate of the borough may be nudging for is casino gambling in Coney Island. Is a plan that Marty's sort of championing now, that the governor sort of cracked the door open to say, we don't want to talk about the morality of it, but just fiscally it makes sense to bring gambling to New York proper and not on the waterways, and we're going to have our lunch eaten by these other people if we don't get on the gambling boat.
Like I say, I think this is a debate that is we should have, and I'm unconvinced that it's a good idea. I've seen a lot of people with gambling problems in my time. I've known people in my family who had gambling problems. It's something that you don't really want to see government promote on some level. And then on the other hand, if Marty Markowitz says this is a great solution for Coney Island, well, okay, that would be solution number 72 in terms of what's a great solution for Coney Island.
Right.
We built an enormously expensive minor league baseball stadium out of there. That did pretty good. We've now got enormous development going out there. That did pretty good. I don't know why we really need casinos as the solution.
More.
But we'll move aside from the casino debate. I think that our borough president, Mr. Markowitz, has a little bit of a speech that he needs to give to his constituents to say that I'm going to be more careful. One of the things in this past year, he had the biggest ethics fine that had ever been levied against an elected official, $20,000. And if you read through the statement by the Conflict of Interest Board and what had been leveled against, he apparently had gone through not just caution lights, but he'd gone through red lights in order to do that. And, those of us, I've known Marty Markowitz a very long time, and I've seen him go through those kinds of caution lights before, and you sort of hope that he takes his foot off the pedal at some point and learns. I think it's time. I think this may be his last time in elected office. I don't think he's going to seek mayoralty. He probably dances in front of his eyes every now and again, but I don't think he's going to run. it would be nice in this last year in office for him to say, you know, you're going to see a Marty Markowitz who's the same ebullient advocate, but I'm going to be more careful in terms of my own behavior, because he owes us that.
Though that was a story that sort of came and went in a funny cycle, but there were all sorts of issues about money and the role of our First Lady of Brooklyn, Jamie Markowitz, in accepting trips where Marty was going and representing the Brooklyn brand in these sort of sister city arrangements, and applying to the Conflict of Interest Board and saying, hey, we would like to go on this trip. But what do you think of Jamie Markowitz as Michelle Obama of Brooklyn? He made the argument that, of course, I should be accompanied by my wife. She has other duties and things that she would do, just as Michelle Obama is called on.
I don't think there's anybody begrudges him the idea of bringing along. I'm not sure I buy this First Lady of Brooklyn business, but that said, no one's going to begrudge him bringing his wife on a trip that he's doing for official, even quasi-official business. Right. But once you're told by the official ethics body of the city, this is the way you have to do it, and you can't bill these expenses, I think you've got to follow those rules. And if you don't follow them, then you're going to have some explaining to do. So this followed under an earlier ethics violation that he was found when he turned to his counsel at the borough president's office and asked him to help with the purchase of a building. And so I'm just saying, I think that Marty's a terrific advocate for the borough of Brooklyn. I think there's a lot of love for him amongst the people of Brooklyn, but I think he's got to do a little mea culpa and say, okay, I'm going to be more careful.
So we've got 2 minutes left. This is going to be one of Marty's last State of the Boroughs. What do you see coming for the next borough president? If we don't even have a lot of candidates who've thrown their hat into the ring just yet, but what kind of person do you think Brooklyn's going to want after the Marty ride? Are we going to go for a sort of shrinking violet sort of administrator, or do we need someone ebullient to be Brooklyn's cheerleader in chief and get some work done as well? What do you see coming down that pipeline?
You know, it is not the most important office any longer. There was a time when it had a vote on the Board of Estimate, and it really was an important office. It is not. But more important than the office itself, I think, is as a recognition of the political power of certain communities. And it troubles me that the Brooklyn Borough Presidency, I think, could use an African American or a Latino, a Hispanic. I think that this is a borough of such mixed ethnic groups that it's astonishing to me that we.
No one's been in that seat yet.
Yeah, I would hope that we'll see a lot of strong candidates from minority communities or so-called minority communities, because really in Brooklyn they're not minorities, right? So, but stepping forward and trying to win that seat. No, that would be my hope.
Well, we'll get more of that as the year goes along, and also see what Marty has to say about the borough and how he's going to wrap up his term in the State of the Borough speech, which is going to be February 1st. So make sure you catch it live here on Brooklyn Independent TV. We'll be out at Brooklyn College. But for right now, that's all the time we have for Intersect today. I'd like to thank Tom Robbins, veteran journalist and now a teacher over at CUNY J School. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
Thank you.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at breakartsmedia.org/BIT.